Okay, let's unpack this. What do we truly know with certainty? I mean, it's a question that feels so foundational, doesn't it? Like, just a basic part of being human.
It really is, and thinkers have been wrestling with it forever.
Absolutely. And today, we're really diving deep into one of philosophy's, well, let's be honest, most challenging texts, but also incredibly rewarding. Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit.
Yeah, and it's important to say right off the bat, this isn't just some dusty old book. Not at all.
Right.
Think of it more like a rigorous journey. It traces the stages consciousness itself goes through.
A journey of consciousness.
Exactly. It's like a roadmap showing how our minds figure things out. Not just the world outside us, but ourselves too, and, ultimately reality itself, or what Hegel calls spirit.
Okay.
So our mission today really is to try and guide you through it. We want to pull out the key themes, the big ideas, the underlying philosophy, give you a kind of shortcut into Hegel's massive project.
Get ready, because this is a journey that's definitely going to challenge your assumptions. About knowledge, sure, but also about yourself, even about history. We're going to find some, honestly, surprising insights into how our everyday experiences are way more complex, more contradictory and dynamic than they seem.
Absolutely. We'll take Hegel's arguments step by step, try to bring some clarity, some context, really get into the depth of what he's offering about, well, the human condition and how thought develops.
So where does Hegel kick off this epic journey? It's interesting. He doesn't start with some big abstract theory.
No, not at all.
He grounds us in something that feels totally undeniable, like super simple, absolutely certain, our immediate awareness of this here now.
Right, that feeling.
It feels so solid. You point to something, hi, this mug right here, and you just think, I know this. Total certainty.
Exactly. That's where he begins. He calls this first form of knowing sensuous certainty.
Sensuous certainty.
Yeah. It's that direct, unmediated awareness, singular things right here, right now, that gut feeling of certainty. But, and this is classic Hegel,
Uh-oh, here it comes.
he immediately shows how this supposedly simple claim starts to unravel the moment you look closely. The moment you try to grab hold of that certainty, it just dissolves.
So it's not really about what we sense, but the act of knowing it immediately. That's the problem.
You got it. Take the now. You say, it is now, but the second you say it,
It's gone.
it's already gone. It's what has been. The now you tried to point to isn't the now that is, it's vanished. And more than that, the now only sort of keeps its identity by not being something else. Like now it's night because it's not day, then now it's day because it's not night.
I see. So it's defined by what it isn't. It's a mediated now, as you put it, not just immediate.
Exactly. Mediated is key here. Its truth isn't just direct. It comes through its relationship to other things, especially its opposite, its negation. So this now that felt so immediate turns out to be, well, a universal concept, really. Any now can be swapped for any other now.
It's like trying to grab a specific moment in time. You can't hold on to that moment, just the general idea of a moment.
That's a great way to put it. And the here is just as slippery.
Okay, how so?
Well, you point to this piece of paper, but the act of pointing, of singling it out, makes it a here among other heres, a simple ensemble of many heres, he says.
So it becomes general, not specific.
Yeah, it becomes a universal space, not that unique, singular spot you thought you were grabbing. What you thought was immediate turns out, when you actually think about it, to be something perceived, categorized, placed in a wider context already.
Wow. So our most basic gut-level sensory certainty just completely falls apart under scrutiny.
Pretty much.
This initial feeling of knowing something absolutely, when you reflect on it, it becomes kind of ineffable, right? You can't really pin it down in a way that builds knowledge. It's knowledge that almost cancels itself out.
Yes, it can't serve as a solid foundation.
That's really fascinating. So what does this mean for you, the listener? How does this challenge your own immediate certainties? Those things you just take for granted. Hegel's saying even those are more complicated.
He absolutely is. The big takeaway here is that real knowledge isn't just passive sensation. It needs reflection. And reflection shows that what seems immediate is actually mediated, universal. It's a starting point for philosophy, not the end.
Okay.
And the failure of the sensuous certainty, it naturally pushes consciousness to try something else. If just sensing isn't enough, maybe we need to organize our sensations better.
Right. We move beyond just sensation,
There.
perception, trying to grasp things. Okay, so we realize the limits of just sensing this here now. So our minds try to organize things. We see an apple, and it's not just random red, sweet, crisp sensations. It's an apple, a thing. But what is a thing, philosophically? Sounds simple, but knowing Hegel, I bet it's not.
You bet correctly. This is the stage of perception, and it's trying to do exactly what you said. Unify diverse properties, color, taste, texture into one coherent thing.
Makes sense.
Hegel breaks down this thinghood into two key aspects. He calls them the also and the one.
The also and the one.
The also is like an indifferent unity. It's where properties just coexist. They sit alongside each other in the thing. Think about the apple again. It's red and sweet and crisp.
Right.
Each quality is just itself. Right. Redness isn't sweetness. Sweetness isn't crispness. They just kind of hang out together in the apple.
So the redness doesn't affect the sweetness doesn't mess with the crispness. They're just all there, a list of features.
And that's the also, but then there's the one. This is more like an excluding unity. It's where the properties actually differentiate themselves, define themselves by not being the others. If they were totally indifferent, just mush.
They wouldn't be distinct properties at all.
Exactly. They are determinate properties only because they are different from each other. Redness isn't sweetness. Sweetness isn't crispness. They exclude each other in their definitions.
Ah, okay. I see the tension, the paradox. How can these distinct qualities, which kind of oppose each other by definition, also exist together in this simple unity of the thing?
Right.
If they exclude each other, how are they in the apple, making one unified thing? It's like the apple is both whole and simultaneously being pulled apart by its own qualities.
That is precisely the contradiction consciousness is wrestling with here. It tries to solve it by seeing the thing as both the indifferent container, the also, and the active differentiator, the one.
But the contradiction doesn't really go away.
No. Consciousness is always aware of the possibility of illusion. Maybe my perception isn't quite right. Maybe the object isn't really that unified. Its standard for truth is self-equality. The object should be consistent with itself.
But how can it be self-equal if it contains all these differences, this internal negativity, as Hegel might say?
That's the challenge. The point is, our everyday act of perceiving objects is incredibly complex philosophically. It means your mind, right now, is navigating this stuff constantly, trying to synthesize these opposites without you even noticing.
So we don't just passively receive objects, we're actively constructing them, dealing with these contradictions.
Absolutely. And our minds, they don't just stop at perceiving things and their messy qualities. We naturally want to look behind the appearances.
Yeah, we want to know why.
We want to grasp the force, the laws that make things work. And that brings us to the next stage, the understanding.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. We move beyond just what things are to why they are that way. We start looking for the hidden stuff, the inner truth, the invisible force driving things, universal laws.
That's the domain of the understanding. It's all about conceptualizing. It tries to grasp force as this unconditioned, universal, something fundamental.
Like gravity, maybe,
Right.
or electromagnetism.
Sort of. But this force isn't static. It has to express itself. And when it does, Hegel says it doubles into two forces. Think of a magnet North Pole, South Pole, or electricity positive, negative. Solicited force.
Right. They seem like distinct opposing things, push and pull, cause and effect.
They seem that way. But Hegel argues their very existence is purely a being posited through another. They only are what they are in relation to each other, and that interaction, that mediating middle.
So north only makes sense because of south. Positive because of negative.
Yeah.
They aren't truly independent.
Exactly. They have no substance of their own apart from that relationship. So when you really examine them, they kind of vanish as independent things. Their being dissolves into the interaction itself.
Wow.
The ultimate truth of force, then, isn't the two separate forces you thought you saw, but the thought of force itself, the concept of interaction. The realization of force is actually the loss of reality for those separate forces.
So we try to explain the world with these forces. But the explanation itself becomes more abstract, the idea of force, rather than the concrete push or pull we started with, like chasing a shadow again.
It is a bit like that. And for consciousness at this stage, this inner reality, this realm of forces and laws, it still feels like a pure otherworldly beyond. Consciousness hasn't quite recognized its own thinking, its own conceptual work, in creating these ideas yet.
Okay.
So the understanding tries to find laws to explain appearances, but often these laws turn out to be, well, incomplete, maybe even superficial, Hegel says. Like, we might try to unify lots of specific observations, a stone falling, planets moving into one big law, like universal attraction.
Which sounds like the goal of science, right? A grand unified theory.
It is. But Hegel points out that in this drive for unification, the specific laws often lose their determinateness. The more universal the law, the more abstract and superficial it gets.
Less specific content?
Right. Universal attraction basically just says everything interacts predictably. It tells you that things are lawful, but not how this specific thing behaves. It's found the concept of law, maybe, but lost the rich detail. And Hegel's very critical here of just relying on analogy or probability.
How so?
He insists that probability loses with regard to truth every difference. Just because things look similar or a pattern seems likely doesn't mean you've found the necessary underlying law. Reason demands more than "it's probably like this." It wants inherent necessity.
So it's a critique of taking intellectual shortcuts, of abstraction that loses touch with the concrete, and methods that aren't rigorous enough.
And this leads him to this really wild idea, the inverted world.
The inverted world, what's that?
Imagine a kind of mirror reality, a super-sensible realm where everything is the opposite of our perceived world. What's sweet here is sour there, North Pole here is South Pole there, what's honored here is despised there.
Whoa. So not just different, but inverted.
Yes. And it's not just a gimmick. It's a way of understanding that opposites are deeply interconnected. They define each other. To grasp the whole truth, you sometimes have to consider the inverse perspective. Our ordinary understanding often simplifies or even reverses things. This inverted world concept forces us to see the interdependence of opposing principles.
That really flips things round. It suggests a complete picture needs the dialectical opposite, not just the surface appearance. A huge challenge to our everyday understanding. Think about how often you encounter situations where the real story seems to be the opposite of what's obvious.
It reveals the limits of just trying to find simple, one-sided laws. So having pushed consciousness, this outward-looking phase, to its limits, encountering these contradictions, Hegel makes a decisive turn.
Inward.
Inward, he asks. What about the knower, the subject doing all this perceiving and understanding? Maybe the stability we're looking for is within us. And this shift brings us to self-consciousness.
Okay, a big shift. We're moving from knowing objects out there to knowing ourselves. In here. This feels fundamental, doesn't it? What exactly is this self-certainty?
It's absolutely pivotal. Self-consciousness is this reflection out of the being of the sensuous and perceived world.
Yeah.
It's a return from out of otherness, meaning consciousness, having kind of exhausted its attempts to find stable truth in external things, turns back on itself. Initially, it just asserts itself, a simple, almost empty statement, I am I.
Like Descartes' I think, therefore I am. Just a basic certainty of existing.
Similar in its starting point, yeah. A motionless tautology, Hegel calls it, an immediate certainty of oneself. But, and this is crucial, this bare I am I isn't enough. It needs otherness to become true, to have content. Self-consciousness fundamentally is desire.
Desire. Desire for what?
Well, think about life itself. Hegel sees life as having this chicken-egg feature. It's both cause and effect of itself. Animals live out their nature, consuming, reproducing. There's a kind of infinity built into their lives, a constant striving. But it's only with self-conscious life, with us, that the whole of life becomes a problem to itself. We're aware of ourselves as living beings, as a species. We don't just live, we know we live.
Right. We reflect on it.
And self-consciousness now has two objects. One is the immediate world, the stuff we sense and perceive, but now it sees that world as a negative, something to be consumed, overcome, used. The other object is itself, its true essence, which it's trying to find or realize through that interaction with the world.
So for us, it's not enough just to be. We need to know we are and have that recognized somehow.
Exactly. And this is where we get the first glimpse of spirit in Hegel's sense. The idea that a self-consciousness is for a self-consciousness.
Meaning we need other people.
We need recognition from another self-consciousness. We can't truly become ourselves, achieve true self-certainty in isolation. It's what Hegel famously phrases as the I that is we and the we that is I.
Wow. That sounds like the very foundation of society, of relationships. But how does this need for recognition first play out? It sounds intense.
Oh, it is. To make this self-certainty true, to prove it's not just an idea but real, individuals must stake one's life. They enter a life and death struggle.
A literal fight to the death. Why?
To prove their freedom, to show they aren't just bound to their physical existence, their animal life. Each one aims at the death of the other, not just out of aggression, but to demonstrate that the other doesn't ultimately count as an independent self to them, and that their own essence transcends mere survival. It's a radical assertion, demanding recognition through dominance.
That is primal. trying to force recognition through violence. But does it work?
Ultimately, no. This trial by death, Hegel says, sublates the truth which was supposed to emerge from it.
Sublates, meaning it cancels but also preserves something.
Sort of. Here it mostly cancels. Death is just a natural negation. If one person dies, there's no one left to give the recognition the winner supposedly sought. They just become like two separate things again.
So the winner doesn't actually get what they wanted, true recognition.
No. So for recognition to happen at all in this scenario, one consciousness has to give in. Choose life over the ideal of freedom. They become the servant to the other's master. But even the master fails because the servant's recognition isn't freely given. It comes from fear. It's not recognition from an equal.
So this whole struggle, while profound, is ultimately a dead end for achieving genuine selfhood through force. Real recognition has to be mutual, freely given between equals.
Precisely.
This is such a powerful idea about how selfhood develops and our deep need for validation. Think about it for yourself. How much of your identity is tied up in how others see you? What struggles, maybe less dramatic ones, do we engage in for recognition?
And this fundamental struggle, with its failure to achieve its goal, forces self-consciousness to try other ways to find freedom and stable self-certainty. It leads down different paths, often with equally paradoxical results.
Okay, so the life and death struggle didn't quite get us there. Recognition can't be forced. So self-consciousness tries other tactics, other strategies to feel free and certain of itself. You mentioned 3 key attempts.
Right. The first path Hegel explores is Stoicism.
Like the ancient Greek and Roman philosophers.
Exactly. Here, self-consciousness tries to find its essence in the pure abstraction of the I. It withdraws inwardly. It tries to become indifferent to external circumstances, pain, pleasure, what others think, the ups and downs of life. Freedom is found in thought alone.
So the idea is I can control my mind, my thoughts, even if I can't control the world, finding freedom by detaching.
That's the core idea, inner self-sufficiency, freedom from the world. But Hegel sees a limitation here. He calls it an incomplete negation of otherness.
Incomplete how?
Because while the Stoic tries to make the world's content only as thought, it's still determinate thought. The Stoic mind, while claiming freedom from the world, still needs the world to provide the stuff it thinks about. It achieves freedom from existence, maybe, but not freedom through it. The external world is still there as this other thing it has to abstract itself from.
Okay, so it's still reacting to the world, even in its detachment. It hasn't fully integrated it. What comes next? Skepticism. That sounds even more radical.
It is. Skepticism takes Stoicism's abstraction and pushes it way further. It's the realization of that abstractness, but it leads to this self-moving disarray. The skeptic denies the reality of everything external. Perceptions, objects, even ethical principles, none of it is real. It's all just appearance or convention.
Wow, so it just denies everything. That sounds difficult to live out. How does a skeptic function?
Well, that's the problem. Hegel calls it insensible claptrap because of its inherent contradictions.
Okay.
The skeptic talks about the absolute disappearance of reality, but they still see, hear, and so on. They still act in the world they claim isn't real. They might deny ethical essentialities, but then they make choices based on them anyway.
So their words and actions are constantly fighting each other.
Constantly, like stubborn children, Hegel says, just contradicting for the sake of it. They hold on to 2 contradictory states, the abstract certainty of their own denial and their actual contingent existence in the world, but they keep them separate, never reconciling them. It's pure negation, but it can't sustain itself. Reality keeps intruding.
It sounds exhausting and ultimately unproductive, a philosophical dead end. So if Stoicism is too abstract and skepticism ties itself in knots, where does that leave consciousness?
It leads to what Hegel calls the unhappy consciousness. This is a really important, complex stage. It's a consciousness that feels deeply divided in a struggle against an enemy, but the enemy is ultimately itself.
Divided how?
It's trying to reconcile its own changeable, finite, flawed self with an idea of an unchangeable consciousness, a perfect, infinite essence, which it sees as its true self, but which feels totally separate, alien, maybe even divine, somewhere out there.
Ah, okay. This resonates. That feeling of spiritual longing, maybe. Striving for an ideal self or a connection to something permanent, but feeling painfully separate from it.
Exactly that. It experiences infinite longing, this deep sense of estrangement. And in its desperation to bridge this gap, it tries to empty itself of its self-sufficiency.
How does it do that?
Through things like asceticism, self-denial, submission to perceived higher powers. It tries to negate its own particular changeable self, hoping that by getting rid of its finite desires, it can somehow merge with that unchangeable infinite essence it longs for.
So it tries to humble itself, get rid of its own ego, essentially.
Yes, turning its being for itself into a thing. But this often results in just projecting that unchangeable essence onto something external. Again, maybe a religious figure, an institution, an abstract ideal which remains stubbornly separate, still looking outside itself.
So it's kind of stuck in this loop of yearning and self-negation, never quite reaching the goal.
It seems that way, but something crucial happens through this struggle. This intense internal conflict, this process of self-renunciation and seeking, actually produces something new. Hegel calls it the category.
The category, what's that?
It's a moment where the unity of the I, self-consciousness and being, reality the object, is forged, even if painfully. The unhappy consciousness, through its very struggle and failure, starts to experience itself as actual, as having an effect, as being involved in reality. It's no longer just passively observing or yearning. It wishes to engender itself by its own activity. It starts to grasp that the I and being are immediately united, even if that unity contains opposition.
So the struggle itself creates a new kind of understanding, a unity that embraces the conflict.
Yes. It's a self-sublating opposition, a unity that includes its own negation. The key insight is dawning. Maybe true self-realization isn't about escaping the finite self or finding an external ideal, but about recognizing the infinite within one's own active, striving, contradictory existence.
That's a massive shift in perspective, this whole journey through unhappiness. It makes you think about your own struggles, doesn't it? The ideals you strive for, the unchangeable essences, and how you square them with your actual, messy, changeable self.
And this realization, born from the unhappy consciousness's journey and culminating in the category, marks a turning point. The self isn't just observing or denying anymore. It's actively seeking its essence in the world, recognizing its own role. This, Hegel says, is the birth of reason.
Okay, so out of that intense inner struggle of the unhappy consciousness comes reason. And reason makes this incredibly bold claim. It's the certainty of being all reality. Wow, that's a huge leap in confidence.
It really is. Reason at this stage has basically absorbed that category, that hard-won connection between self-consciousness and being reality that emerged from the previous struggle.
Right.
Now it understands this category as the pure essentiality of the existing. Reason flat out asserts, self-consciousness and being are the same essence, not just similar or related, but fundamentally the same, in and for itself.
So my thinking, my I, isn't just looking at reality from the outside. In some deep way, my rational mind is reality, or at least shares the same fundamental structure.
That's the core assertion, yes. The external world is no longer seen as something alien or fundamentally separate. It's viewed as a manifestation, an expression of reason itself. A rational structure underlies both thought and the world.
That's a pretty radical idealism.
Yeah.
But is it that simple? Does Hegel just leave it there?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
He immediately critiques what he calls one-sided, bad idealism.
Bad idealism. What makes it bad?
It's the kind of idealism that just declares consciousness as all reality, maybe in a very abstract way, but then it can't really explain how. It often ends up needing some alien impact or sense impressions from outside to give consciousness something to work with.
So it claims unity, but secretly brings back the separation between mind and world, like the skeptic again.
Exactly. It becomes self-contradictory. True reason, for Hegel, can't just assert this unity, it has to demonstrate it. It has to show how the structures of thought and the structures of reality are intrinsically linked, how they unfold together.
It needs to show its work, basically, not just state the answer.
Precisely. And Hegel gets quite fiery here. He dismisses the idea of just sort of coming upon a list of categories or principles, maybe finding them in grammar or logic or empirical observation as a disgrace to science.
A disgrace. Strong words.
Very. His point is, reason can't just find its fundamental tools lying around externally. It has to demonstrate the pure necessity it has within itself for these categories. It has to show why these concepts, and not others, are essential for understanding reality and how they arise from reason's own nature. If understanding can't even justify its own basic concepts, how can it claim to understand anything else with necessity?
That makes sense. True knowledge has to be internally coherent, self-justifying, not just based on external observation or assumption. So this is a really powerful claim about how thought and reality connect, and a challenge to just accepting ideas without seeing their inner logic. How often do you, listening, encounter ideas just thrown out there, asserted as true, without any real demonstration of why they must be true? Hegel's demanding a much deeper level of justification.
So if reason is now confident that it is, in essence, all reality, how does it go about actually knowing that reality? Well, its first move is to observe, to look at nature and find the laws, but now with this underlying confidence that the laws it finds won't be fundamentally alien to itself.
Okay, so reason's first instinct is to look outward again. Observe the natural world, find the order, the laws. This feels a bit like the birth of modern science, doesn't it? But with this new philosophical backing.
Yes, very much so. Reason, being certain its reality, looks at the world with this conviction. What ought to be is also, in fact, what is. If something is truly rational, truly lawful, it must actually exist. And conversely, what only should be, but is not, has no real truth.
So no room for just wishful thinking or abstract possibilities that don't actually show up in the world. If it's a real law, it has to be manifest. It demands empirical grounding.
Exactly. It seeks the universally effective. And the instinct of reason, as Hegel calls it, actively works to purify the law and its moments into concepts. It does this through careful observation, experimentation. You start shedding the specific contingent details to get at the underlying universal principle.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about electricity. Initially, maybe it was known just as resin electricity, static from rubbing amber, and glass electricity from rubbing glass, tied to specific things.
Right.
But through experiments, you realize the things aren't essential. You abstract the core principle, purely positive and negative electricity. It becomes a universal concept detached from the specific resin or glass.
So you move from the particular instance to the universal law, but you do it through observing the particulars, refining the concept.
Precisely. Same with chemistry. Think about acid and base. They aren't really stable things on their own, like a tooth or a claw, he says colorfully. Their whole essence is to pass over immediately into a neutral product, salt and water.
Their reality is in the reaction, the transformation.
Yes, their being is a sublated being, a universal process, not a static state. They only have truth as part of this dynamic relationship. And again, Hegel warns against jumping to conclusions based just on analogy or probability. Finding a real law requires demonstrating necessity, not just likelihood.
It's a push for rigorous conceptual understanding, not just surface pattern matching.
And this observational approach extends to living things, to organic nature. Here, reason sees the thing as its own purpose. An organism isn't just pushed around by external forces. It seems to have an internal drive. It's self-preserving, self-organizing.
Like it has an inner blueprint it's following.
Kind of. This leads to the law. The outer is an expression of the inner. The way an organism looks and behaves, its outer form, is an expression of its internal life principle, its way of being in its environment.
This really highlights the philosophical thinking behind biology, doesn't it? Trying to connect form and function, outer structure and inner life. When you look for patterns or explanations in the world, are you finding inherent laws, or are you maybe imposing your own ideas, simplifying things? Hegel's making us think about that process.
So, reason tries to find these laws in external nature. But if the outer is an expression of the inner, what about human nature? Can we apply the same observational method? Look at the outside of a person to understand their inner self, their consciousness.
Okay. And this leads to some ideas that sound, well, pretty outdated now, right? Trying to read someone's character from their face, physiognomy, or figure out their personality from the bumps on their head, phenology. That really stands out. It seems like a very literal attempt to connect inner and outer.
It absolutely was. And Hegel uses these examples to show the limits of this purely observational approach when applied to self-consciousness. Psychological observation, he argues, ultimately fails to find a reliable scientific law connecting the inner self to outer actuality in this direct physical way.
Why does it fail?
Well, take physiognomy. It looks at things like lines on the hand, the tone of voice, maybe even handwriting, seeing them as direct, maybe involuntary, signs of inner character or disposition.
Like your face reveals your true nature, whether you want it to or not.
Right. But Hegel pushes back hard. He says the deed alone is instead to be asserted to be his genuine being, not his physique. What truly reveals you is not your appearance, not even your intentions, but your accomplished work, your actual actions and their results in the world. That's the reality of who you are. Objectivity shows what the deed is.
Actions speak louder than looks, basically. It's what you do that defines you.
Exactly. Then there's phrenology. This was the attempt to map specific mental faculties, intelligence, kindness, aggression onto specific areas and bumps of the skull.
Believing the shape of your skull reflected the shape and power of your brain underneath in specific zones.
Yes. And Hegel is pretty scathing about this. He says, bluntly, the brain is the living head, the skull is the caput mortuum, the dead head.
The skull is just bone. It's not the thinking part.
Right. The skull is a dead being. It doesn't contain spirit or consciousness in any active way. Sure, there might be some mechanical relationship. Maybe the brain's activity influences the skull shape over time, or the skull constrains the brain. But to call the skull an organ of spirit, to link bumps to complex thoughts or personality traits, that's a clumsiness and deceit, Hegel says. Why? Because it lacks the relevant matter itself, i.e. the concept.
It's missing the actual thinking, the consciousness, the meaning. It's just looking at the container, not the content.
Precisely. You don't commit crimes or write poems with your skull. You do it with your thoughts, your intentions, your spirit, expressed through your actions. The core insight here is that consciousness, spirit, can't be reduced to a mere physical object or an external sign. It's dynamic, it's activity, and its primary expression is in the deeds it performs, not in static physical features.
This is such a strong critique of any kind of crude reductionism, trying to boil down complex human thoughts and actions to simple physical markers. How often, even today, do you maybe judge a book by its cover or a person by their appearance, instead of looking at their actions, their accomplished work, the spirit driving them? Hegel's pushing for a deeper view.
So reason's attempt to understand the inner self by observing the outer body reaches a dead end. It shows the limits of just looking. This failure pushes spirit again. It needs to find its truth not just in observation, but in its own active participation in the world, in its social and ethical life. Which brings us into the realm of spirit proper, starting with ethical life.
Okay, now we're moving into spirit with a capital S, thinking about community, laws, ethics. This feels like a big expansion from just individual reason observing things. How does that individual consciousness become part of this larger ethical substance?
This is where reason matures. It's no longer just an individual certainty. It's become spirit as the certainty of being. All reality has been elevated to truth. Spirit is now conscious of itself as its world and of the world as itself.
So the separation is overcome? The world is spirit and spirit is the world?
In a sense, yes. This ethical substance is that unity of self-consciousness and being, but now lived out collectively. It's the shared life, the implicit moral fabric of a community which expresses itself in social estates, in laws, customs, institutions. Individuals find their identity, their purpose within this shared ethical world, not just on their own.
So the laws and norms aren't just random rules. They're supposed to be the expression of the community's collective reason, its shared understanding of itself. But are they always truly ethical? Or can they still be flawed?
Oh, absolutely they can be flawed. Hegel examines this critically. Take a seemingly universal ethical rule. Everyone ought to speak the truth. Sounds good, right?
Seems pretty straightforward.
But the moment you state it as an absolute command, you almost immediately have to add conditions, don't you? Well, if he knows the truth, or speak the truth as you understand it.
Right, there are always nuances, exceptions.
Exactly. So the supposed universal necessity flips into complete contingency. It becomes a confused muddle because the law says one thing but implies another. It ends up not speaking the truth about its own limitations. It reveals this tension between the abstract universal rule and the concrete situation.
And this can lead to what you call the tyranny of law-giving, where laws feel arbitrary.
Precisely. If a law has a contingent content, if its universality is just asserted without being truly necessary and rational for everyone, it can feel like tyrannical outrage, just making arbitrariness into law. True laws, for Hegel, should arise from the community's own absolute consciousness, felt as internally necessary, not just imposed from outside.
Okay, and within this ethical life, he puts a lot of focus on the family, doesn't he? In some surprising ways.
He does. The family is a fundamental sphere of ethical life. Interestingly, he says its purpose is somewhat negative vis-a-vis the family itself.
Negative, how?
Its role is to take the individual out of just raw natural existence, to discipline that naturalness, and prepare them for virtue and participation in the wider community, the state. It's the first school of ethical behavior.
Okay, that makes sense. Socialization.
And ethical action within the family, Hegel emphasizes, concerns the whole individual, but paradoxically focuses intensely on not the living, but rather the dead.
Duty to the dead. Why is that so important ethically?
Because caring for the dead, honoring ancestors, performing burial rites, these acts lift the individual's particular existence into a kind of universal significance. Death makes the transient individual a lasting member of the community's ongoing story, connecting the living to the past and the collective essence. It's a profound ethical duty that transcends immediate utility.
That's a really deep, almost ancient perspective on family duty. What about relationships among the living? He talks about the brother and sister specifically.
Yes, he sees the brother-sister relationship as unique ethically. They are free individualities with respect to each other. Unlike husband and wife, based on desire, or parent-child, based on natural inequality, their bond is pure and unmixed with any natural relation of desire or immediate dependence in the same way.
A kind of pure, balanced recognition.
Sort of. And he sees the sister's duty to her brother as the highest, within this familial sphere, his loss as irreplaceable. She often embodies the intuitive, perhaps unconscious grasp of the family's ethical essence, the guardian of this divine law within the household, while the brother moves out into the human law of the state. It's a complex dynamic. The key idea here is that real ethical life isn't just about abstract rules. It's lived out in these concrete relationships and duties, even seemingly strange ones, that connect us to the collective.
This really makes you think about the basis of morality. Are the rules you follow truly universal, or are they shaped by these deeper, maybe less conscious communal ties and traditions? How do your family relationships embody ethical truths differently from abstract laws?
But this ethical substance, this immediate unity of individual and community, isn't stable forever. Spirit develops, and it can become alienated from itself. The individual can start to feel separate from the collective world they've created. This leads into the complexities of cultural formation.
Alienated spirit. So what happens when that immediate unity breaks down? When spirit feels separated from its own world? You mentioned this plays out in cultural development, particularly with the Enlightenment.
Exactly. In alienated spirit, self-consciousness looks at its world, its social structures, its beliefs, its art, and sees it as a hard actuality, something alien. These things are the work of self-consciousness, creations of spirit itself, but they now confront the individual as external forces, things they don't immediately recognize as their own product.
It's like feeling disconnected from society, or that institutions are just out there controlling things.
Precisely. And cultural formation, or Bildung, as Hegel calls it, becomes this process of self-relinquishing and de-essentialization. Individuals have to adapt to this seemingly external world, shape themselves to fit into it, while also trying to shape it. It's a process of conforming and asserting oneself within a world that feels somewhat foreign.
A shift from feeling organically part of a whole to feeling like an individual navigating an external system.
Right, and this sets the stage for the Enlightenment. Hegel characterizes the Enlightenment spirit as pure insight. It's the spirit that tries to comprehend nothing but the self and everything as the self. It wants to erase all objectivity, dissolve anything that seems external or given, and transform all being in itself into being for itself, that is, into something understood and validated by individual reason alone.
So it attacks tradition, faith, anything based on external authority.
Aggressively. It challenges faith and its otherworldly beyond, its dogmas, its mysteries. Pure insight wants transparency. It wants to tear down anything that reason can't immediately grasp and justify from within itself.
It wants to make everything make rational sense, based solely on the individual's understanding. But does Hegel see problems with this?
He does. He points out contradictions. For instance, the Enlightenment condemns faith's objects like relics or consecrated bread as just a piece of stone or bread dough, reducing them to inert matter.
Right, stripping away the symbolic meaning.
But in doing that, Hegel says it's using the same logic that could condemn its own object, the ordinary things of the world revealed by sensuous certainty, as lacking spirit too. It also highlights a tension within faith itself, which often struggles to fully reconcile its spiritual essence with its material expressions. The Enlightenment's critique, while powerful, operates through a similar kind of abstraction.
So the Enlightenment, in its very critique, mirrors some of the abstracting tendencies it's attacking. That's ironic.
It is, and this whole period, this focus on individual reason and demystification, gives rise to the concept of utility.
Utility, usefulness.
Exactly. Everything starts to be judged by its usefulness. Everything is useful. Things exist for another. People become useful members of society, valued for what they contribute.
A very pragmatic, almost transactional view.
Very much so. Scratch my back, I'll scratch yours becomes the model. Even religion gets reinterpreted through this lens. It's seen as pure utility itself, maybe the most useful thing because it promotes social order or personal comfort, not because it's necessarily true in some deeper sense.
Wow. So value becomes purely instrumental. What something is gets overshadowed by what it's for.
Precisely. This focus on abstraction, whether in critique or in valuing utility, eventually leads thought towards concepts like pure matter, reality stripped down to its bare minimum, and pure thinking, reason as self-identical rationality. It even leads towards the insight that being and thinking are in themselves the same. But the Enlightenment often grasps this identity unconsciously, still seeing its object as separate, not fully recognizing its own conceptual activity in shaping reality. The key point is that even in this powerful drive for reason and freedom, spirit can become estranged from its own creations, viewing the world instrumentally.
This really holds up a mirror to our own time, doesn't it? Debates about reason versus faith, the tendency to measure everything by its usefulness. How much do you evaluate things based on their utility? Do you feel that tension between what something is in itself and what's for you or society? Clearly, these aren't new issues.
And this relentless drive for pure insight, for absolute freedom from external constraints, can take a very dark turn, pushing liberation to a dangerous extreme.
Okay, this section sounds intense. Absolute freedom and terror. It sounds like it could be about historical events, maybe the French Revolution's reign of terror, but Hegel's digging into a deeper philosophical problem, right? What happens when the idea of freedom becomes totally absolute with no limits?
Exactly. When spirit reaches this state of absolute freedom, it represents the universal will trying to assert itself purely, negating all specific laws, social structures, traditions, individual differences, anything that limits its pure, undifferentiated universality.
Total freedom, total equality, no restrictions.
That's the ideal. But here's the paradox. This absolute freedom, precisely because it's so absolute, so devoid of specific content, cannot produce any positive work or positive deed.
Why not?
Because any specific action, any new law or institution it tried to create would immediately limit that absolute freedom. It would introduce difference, structured particularity, which contradicts the ideal of pure, undifferentiated universality.
So for the universal will to actually do anything?
It has to somehow gather itself up into the one of individuality, Hegel says. It needs a singular leader, a single will, to act in its name. But the moment it does that,
It contradicts itself. A single leader excludes everyone else, betraying the universal ideal. A dictator acting in the name of universal freedom. That's chilling.
it is. And since it can't create anything positive without contradicting itself, its only possible action is negative doing. It becomes purely destructive. Hegel calls it the fury of disappearing.
The fury of disappearing.
Yes. It's the relentless destruction of all existent structures, all individual distinctions, all concrete forms of life, all in the name of this abstract, empty freedom. It can only tear down. It can't build up.
So its only work is destruction, leaving nothing behind.
Pretty much. Hegel says the sole work and deed of universal freedom is in fact death. And he describes this death in stark terms. It has no inner extent and no inner fulfillment. It's the coldest, emptiest death of all, having no more meaning than chopping off a head of cabbage or swallowing a mouthful of water.
Wow, that's incredibly bleak. Meaningless abstract negation. Pure terror.
It's the ultimate paradox. The pursuit of absolute, contentless freedom leads to absolute, meaningless destruction, even of the very individuals who sought that freedom. The key insight is that freedom needs content, structure, and particularity to be meaningful. Otherwise, it's just a destructive void.
But surely that can't be the end of the story. Does anything come out of this terror?
Yes, it forces a reversal. The experience of this universal death, the sheer fear of their absolute lord and master death, makes individuals recoil. They acquiesce in negation and difference again. They return to concrete life, to partitioned and restricted works, reestablishing social structures, various social estates.
So the terror forces a return to order, structure, maybe a more limited but stable form of life.
Exactly. They recognize the need for difference, for content, even if it means giving up the dream of absolute, undifferentiated freedom.
This is such a powerful commentary on the dangers of abstract ideals taken to extremes, divorced from concrete reality. Have you ever seen situations where chasing some absolute ideal led to chaos and destruction, only to result in a swing back towards structure and limits? It really speaks to the human need for concrete order, even if it's imperfect.
And emerging from this chaos, this failure of absolute external freedom, spirit turns inward again, seeking authority not in the collective will, but within the individual self. This leads to moral consciousness, the realm of conscience.
Okay, so after the terrifying dead end of absolute freedom, we swing back inward to our personal sense of right and wrong, our conscience. This feels like a return to individual ethics, a more stable ground maybe. But knowing Hegel, I suspect it's not quite that simple.
You suspect correctly. Moral consciousness, as it first appears, is still incomplete. Its understanding and its will are affected by sensibility, by feelings and circumstances. It grasps duty, but often as only one virtue, only one pure duty, a kind of empty, abstract universal.
Like just knowing I should do good, but without specific content.
Exactly. Then conscience emerges as the self-certainty that tries to give content to that empty duty, that empty law. Conscience says, duty is what I, in my inner conviction, know to be duty. It claims the authority to determine the specific content of morality for itself.
So my conscience is my guide. It tells me the specifics of what's right in this situation. That sounds like how many people think about morality.
It does. But Hegel digs into the complexities. While conscience claims to get its content purely from itself, from pure duty, he argues that the circle of the self into which determinateness as such falls is that of so-called sensibility. Meaning inevitably the content it chooses is influenced by impulses and inclinations, by personal feelings, contingent situations, desires. Even when trying to be purely dutiful, our human nature, our sensibility creeps in and shapes the content. So there's a tension between the subjective certainty of my conscience and the objective universality that duty claims.
It's hard to be purely rational about duty when you're a feeling, desiring human being in a complex world. Our conscience isn't operating in a vacuum.
Precisely. And this is where language becomes absolutely crucial for Hegel.
Language again, how does it fit in here?
Language is the self severing itself from itself, he says. It's how the self makes its inner conviction, its moral judgment, objective. By speaking it, expressing it, justifying it to others, in this objectivity, it likewise sustains itself as this self. Language allows for communication, for seeking recognition of one's moral stance, for potential judgment, forgiveness, and reconciliation with the community. It makes the private public.
So conscience isn't just a silent inner voice. It needs to be expressed, tested, potentially reconciled with others through language.
Yes, and the way this plays out can lead to certain extreme and ultimately problematic figures that represent failures of moral consciousness. Hegel describes two key ones, the beautiful soul and the hard heart.
The beautiful soul. That sounds nice.
It sounds nice, but it's actually tragic. The beautiful soul is a consciousness so obsessed with maintaining its inner purity, its moral perfection, that it lives with the anxiety that it will stain the splendor of its innerness through action and existence.
So it's afraid to act, afraid to get its hands dirty in the real world.
Exactly. It flees from contact with actuality, from the messy compromises and potential failures of real deeds. It steadfastly perseveres in its obstinate powerlessness to renounce its own self, clinging to its perfect inner state. But because it refuses to act, to externalize itself, its burning embers gradually die out. It vanishes like a shapeless vapor, having achieved purity but no actual effect in the world. It lacks the force to be.
Wow. Paralyzed by its own perfectionism. Pure, but totally ineffective. That's a sad image. What about the opposite, the hard heart?
The hard heart is the judging consciousness. It's the moral consciousness that looks at the actions of others, especially their failings, and repels this community from itself. It refuses to see the continuity with the other, the shared humanity.
It's judgmental and unforgiving.
Yes. It does not recognize that in its absolute certainty of itself, spirit has a mastery over every deed, meaning it fails to see the possibility of redemption, of reconciliation. It holds itself rigidly apart, clinging to its own moral superiority, placing obstacles in the way of others returning from their deeds, refusing the forgiveness and mutual understanding that language makes possible. It remains locked in its own non-communicative being for itself.
These two figures really expose the pitfalls of conscience, don't they? The beautiful soul is too withdrawn, the hard heart too rigid. It makes you think about your own moral life. How do you balance inner conviction with the need for action and engagement? Do you ever lean towards the beautiful soul's inaction or the hard heart's judgment? Hegel challenges that simple idea of just following your conscience. True morality seems to require action, engagement, and crucially, the possibility of reconciliation through shared understanding and language.
Absolutely. And having explored these intricate paths of individual and collective reason and the complexities of ethical and moral life, Hegel turns to the final major shape of consciousness before absolute knowing, the attempt to grasp the infinite most directly through religion.
Okay, religion. For Hegel, this isn't just about specific doctrines or churches, is it? It seems like a fundamental way consciousness tries to make sense of the ultimate reality of the infinite.
That's exactly right. Religion, in the phenomenology, is a crucial stage where spirit tries to grasp the infinite. Initially, it's grasped incompletely as some kind of supersensible essence, the hidden truth behind the everyday world. Spirit knows itself here, but at first it knows itself in the form of immediacy, as being.
Meaning it experiences the divine or the absolute more concretely, maybe through nature or symbols, rather than purely through abstract thought.
Precisely. It starts with more immediate, concrete forms and evolves. Hegel traces this first through different forms of natural religion.
Natural religion, like seeing the divine in nature itself. Where does he start?
He starts with very early, almost primal forms. From a shapeless essence, a vague spiritual feeling it develops. He talks about the innocence of the flower religion, like a simple, unreflective adoration of nature's beauty, a self void of self. But this gives way to something more dynamic, more conflict-ridden. The seriousness of warring life, the guilt of animal religion.
Animal religion. What does that involve?
Think of early communities or tribes identifying with specific animal spirits, seeing their own essence, their distinctiveness, reflected in these powerful natural forms. This often involves hostile movement, conflicts between groups who identify with different animal spirits, embodying the struggle and division found in nature itself. Spirit sees itself fragmented into these different warring natural shapes.
So it's spirit recognizing itself, but only partially, through these specific, limited, even conflicting natural forms.
Yes. But even in this conflict, this hatred, a process unfolds. The very struggle highlights difference, but also interdependence. And eventually, Hegel suggests, the laborer retains the upper hand over these animal spirits.
Laborer. Human work.
Yes. Human activity, the ability to shape nature, to produce things, demonstrates a power that's not only negative, but rather is a steady hand and is positive. It transcends mere natural conflict. This points towards the idea that spirit is artist. Consciousness starts to find its expression not just in nature, but by shaping nature, creating forms where spirit encounters spirit. This leads towards more formalized religious practice, the cult.
The cult. So rituals, worship.
Exactly. The cult involves hymnal devotion, practices aimed at achieving a pure satisfaction of the self through itself, a feeling of unity with the divine essence. It's about becoming a purified soul, at one with the essence.
And how is this purification achieved? Through sacrifice.
Yes, sacrifice is key. It's seen as a secret completion. This often involves renunciation of all possession and right of property and consumption. By giving up something valuable, possessions, animals, fruits of the harvest, the individual reflects their action into the universal or into the essence.
So the act of sacrifice connects the individual's action to the divine.
Right. And the sacrifice of, say, an animal symbolizes that the divine essence must have already in itself sacrificed itself, simply by giving itself existence, by becoming manifest in the world. The ritual reenacts this divine self-giving. The cult is where the community actively works to bridge the gap between the human and the divine through these symbolic actions.
Okay. And from the cult, we move to art religion. This sounds like ancient Greece again, with their beautiful statues and myths.
Precisely. This is a major step where spirit knowing itself finds a beautiful embodiment in art. Language becomes clearer, more universal, moving beyond just ritualistic chants or pronouncements. Spirit, the collective consciousness, works itself into definite public shapes, sculpture, epic poetry, drama. These artworks become the sensuous presence of the divine and the community's ideals.
Like seeing the gods and heroes right there in marble, or hearing their stories told, making the abstract tangible and beautiful.
Exactly. Think of a figure like Achilles, the beautiful fencer Hegel mentions. He's a singular individual, but he embodies the spirit, the ideals of the whole nation. Yet even here, there's a limitation. The hero's embodiment is also a downfall of particularity into the universal. And when the hero appears on stage, say in a tragedy, he fragments into both his mask and into the actor, into the persona and the actual self.
Ah, the gap between the ideal image and the real person playing the part, or the real flawed hero behind the myth.
Right, the mask has to come off eventually. Art, however beautiful, remains an external representation. It's spirit encountering spirit, but still in an external, static form. It doesn't fully overcome the separation. The key theme in natural religion is this progression. Spirit first finds itself in nature, then in ritual action, then in beautiful artistic forms, but each stage reveals its own limitations, the lingering gap between the ideal and the real, the divine and the human.
This makes you think about how you encounter the ideal or the divine today. Through nature, ritual, art, heroes. And do you feel that same tension between the perfect representation and the flawed reality? It really highlights the power and limits of aesthetic experience and spiritual understanding.
And from these natural and artistic forms, religion evolves further into what Hegel calls revealed religion. Here, the divine isn't just represented, it's supposed to explicitly communicate itself. But even this revelation isn't straightforward.
Revealed religion. Okay, so this sounds like religions based on scripture, prophecy, direct communication from the divine. You'd think this would finally bring clarity, wouldn't you? And the ambiguity. But you're saying Hegel finds problems here too, problems of deceptiveness.
He does. Even in revealed knowing, consciousness can experience the deceptiveness of that knowing. The divine truth might be revealed, but it's often revealed in ways that are still open to interpretation, misinterpretation, conflict. Following one divine command might lead you to violate another. The revelation itself might be ambiguous.
So the message isn't always clear, even if it's supposedly straight from the source. He mentions things like oracles and witches as warning signs of deception. What's he getting at there? Is it just dismissing superstition?
It's deeper than just dismissing superstition. He uses examples like the riddle of the Sphinx, the oracle's ambiguous promises that could lead to disaster, the strange pronouncements of witches, the voices of trees and birds, the dream. He sees these not as genuine ways truth appears, but as highlighting the dangers of not being reflectively prudent. Meaning they show the risk involved in uncritically accepting external pronouncements, especially ambiguous or fragmented ones, as absolute truth. They represent the singularity and the contingency of knowing when it relies solely on external revelation without engaging one's own reason and critical reflection. They warn us that consciousness can be easily misled if it's passive.
So even revealed truth requires our active interpretation and critical thought. We can't just passively receive it.
Exactly. And the actual truth, Hegel suggests, often emerges only through conflict, through the mutual downfall of both powers and of the self-conscious characters, the conflicting interpretations, the flawed human agents, the ambiguous divine messages, they all have to clash and negate each other.
A process of working through the contradictions again.
Yes. This conflict eventually leads to a kind of reconciliation of the opposition with itself. This might happen symbolically in the lethe of the netherworld and death. A forgetting of the specific conflicts, a moving beyond the particular quarrels and absolution from the crime itself. It's a spiritual process of purgation and transcendence.
Like letting go of the specific fights and interpretations to reach a higher level of understanding.
Sort of. And through this whole process, fate completes the depopulation of heaven.
Depopulation of heaven, what does that mean?
It means the dissolving of the old pantheon, the multitude of individual gods and spirits from earlier stages. That intermingling of individuality and essence, which is devoid of thought, gets transcended. Individuality that's just superficially adhered to essence is seen as inessential.
So the specific anthropomorphic gods fade away.
They merge into the recognition of one highest power, Hegel suggests, using Zeus as an example. But this highest power isn't just a bigger individual god. It represents a more unified, rational, ethical force embodying state power, family order, the hearth, moral obligation, the oath, the inner life. It's a move towards a more universal, conceptually grasped divine. The takeaway is that even revealed religion isn't the end of the story. It must also go through its own dialectic, confronting ambiguity and contradiction, purging its less essential elements, and moving towards a more universal, rational understanding of the absolute.
This really complicates the idea of simple, clear, divine truth. How do you, listening, navigate conflicting beliefs or interpretations, whether religious or otherwise? Hegel shows that critical thinking, facing contradictions, and seeking reconciliation are vital, even in the realm of spirit.
And all these complex journeys, consciousness grappling with the world, self-consciousness struggling for recognition, reason-seeking laws, spirit living in communities, and striving through religion, they are all, for Hegel, ultimately leading towards, and are encompassed within, a final, comprehensive form of understanding, absolute knowing.
Okay, we finally climbed the mountain, reached the summit. Absolute knowing. This is the culmination of everything we've been discussing. What exactly is it? How does it bring all these threads together?
Absolute knowing is the stage where spirit knowing itself as spirit is finally achieved. It's not about suddenly knowing every fact in the universe. It's about understanding the fundamental nature of knowing itself and spirit's role in it. It involves the overcoming of the object of consciousness. But crucially, this doesn't mean the object disappears or is ignored. Instead, it's overcome through the self-relinquishing of self-consciousness that posits thinghood. Consciousness recognizes its own activity in how the object appears to it. This self-relinquishing is both positive as well as negative.
So consciousness stops seeing the object as totally separate, totally out there, and recognizes its own role in structuring that object through concepts. The subject-object split is finally healed.
Exactly. The object is now understood in its full conceptual richness, encompassing all the previous stages. Its immediate being, like in sensuous certainty, its relations and properties, perception, its underlying essence and laws, understanding. The object is seen as a syllogism, Hegel says.
A syllogism, like in logic.
Meaning it's understood as a dynamic process, a movement where the universal concept expresses itself through the particular object, which in turn reveals the universal. The self, through its whole journey, has effectively posited the object through its own conceptual activity, and now it recognizes this. The object isn't alien anymore. It's a manifestation of spirit's own logic.
And you mentioned the beautiful soul comes back here, the one that was paralyzed by purity.
Yes, the beautiful soul, previously isolated and ineffective, now finds universality. Its pure knowing of pure, inwardly turned being as spirit. Its focus on inner purity is now realized through its engagement with the world, becoming the divine self-intuition. It stops being this an abstract ideal and finds its truth in concrete, active, reconciled existence.
So the beautiful soul gets integrated, finds its place through action and recognition. That's a really satisfying resolution.
It is, and this pure knowing of absolute knowing is described as a simple immediacy which is as much being and existence as it is essence. It's a knowing that fully embraces estrangement and negativity, all the conflict, contradiction, even what seems like evil as necessary, integral parts of the concept's own unfolding. Difference and alienation aren't external problems to truth. They are moments within the truth's development. The absolute concept recognizes its own negativity as essential to its vitality. The ultimate insight here is profound self-recognition. Seeing your own conceptual activity mirrored in the world, understanding the world not just as external stuff, but as the ongoing story of spirits and your own development. It's a knowing beyond the subject-object divide.
But this absolute knowing, it isn't some static endpoint, right? Like philosophy solves everything, game over. It's still dynamic.
Absolutely. It's not a frozen state. It's deeply connected to the ongoing processes of time and history. Hashtag 6.2. Time, history, and the Golgotha of absolute spirit.
So this grand philosophical system, it even wraps its head around time and history. It seems incredibly ambitious, trying to provide a framework for literally everything.
It is incredibly ambitious. For Hegel, time is the pure self, externally intuited by the self, but not grasped by the self. It is only the intuited concept.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
In earlier stages, we experience time as just one thing after another, this external flow that carries us along, something we don't fully control or understand. It's just intuited. But when the concept grasps itself, when spirit achieves absolute knowing and understands its own dynamic, self-creating nature, it sublates its temporal form.
Sublates time. It overcomes time.
It understands time differently. Time stops being just this external sequence. It's understood as the internal rhythm of spirit's own unfolding, the necessary movement of the concept through its own stages, its contradictions and resolutions.
So time isn't just a container for events anymore. It's the very pulse of spirit's development, the beat of its becoming.
That's a good way to put it. Time appears as the destiny and necessity of the spirit that is not yet completed within itself. It's what pushes spirit to externalize itself, to realize its potential, to enrich self-consciousness. And the whole journey we've just traced in the phenomenology, that's an inwardizing recollection of this entire temporal experience.
A recollection, like remembering.
More than just remembering, it's conceptually grasping, preserving, and integrating all those past stages, sensation, perception, struggle, reason, religion, understanding their necessity and elevating them into the higher form of substance that is absolute knowing. It's understanding how we got here.
And how does actual human history fit into this? The rise and fall of civilizations, different eras.
History, as we normally think of it, the sequence of events, cultures, spirits replacing each other, often appearing contingent or accidental, that's the preservation according to their freestanding existence. It's the story as it plays out externally. But the science of phenomenal knowing, which is what Hegel believes the phenomenology provides, is the conceptually grasped organization of that history.
So philosophy reveals the inner logic, the necessary pattern, within the seemingly chaotic events of history.
Yes, it sees the entire historical process as the gradual unfolding, the self-realization of absolute spirit.
Which brings us to that incredibly powerful final image Hegel uses.
Indeed. He concludes by saying that conceptually grasped history and the science of knowing it, both together, form the recollection and the Golgotha of absolute spirit, the actuality, the truth, the certainty of its throne, without which it would be lifeless and alone, only...
The Golgotha of absolute spirit. Golgotha, the site of the crucifixion, death, and resurrection. Why end on such a stark, almost religious image?
Because it encapsulates the entire dialectical process. The journey of spirit, the path of history, is not smooth. It's filled with suffering, conflict, negation, the death of old forms of understanding and ways of life. Just as in Christian theology the crucifixion was necessary for the resurrection, these painful negations, these deaths, are necessary for spirit to progress, to overcome its limitations and realize itself more fully. This recollection of its entire difficult, contradictory history, that's what constitutes spirit's throne. That's its reality, its truth, its self-certainty. Without having gone through that struggle, that Golgotha spirit would just be an empty idea, lifeless and alone. It's through the suffering and overcoming inherent in history that spirit becomes actual, real, and truly knows itself. The profound implication is that history isn't random. It's the often brutal stage on which spirit realizes itself, and our own struggles, individual and collective, are part of that grand necessary drama. #outro.
Wow. What an absolutely incredible journey. Through the twists and turns, the deep, sometimes dark, but ultimately, Hegel hopes, illuminating world of the phenomenology of spirit. We've gone all the way from just sensing this here now to this vast concept of absolute knowing.
We really have, and the biggest takeaway, I think, is that knowledge isn't just something you get like collecting stamps. It's a process, a dynamic, often difficult process of development, a becoming of itself, as Hegel puts it.
Right.
Spirit doesn't just pop into existence fully formed. It has to earn its truth. And it does that by, as Hegel famously says, looking the negative in the face and lingering with it, by confronting contradictions, enduring alienation, working through the hard stuff.
Yeah. And this deep dive really shows how things we think of as separate, self-consciousness, freedom, reason, community, religion, they're all deeply interconnected. They're moments in this larger evolving story, each stage building on the limits of the one before it, pushing spirit onward.
Absolutely. And maybe the most profound insight is that your own journey, your own struggles with understanding, with dealing with things that seem other or negative, your own personal growth, it's not just your story in isolation. In Hegel's view, it participates in the immense recollection of spirits. It's part of the way the absolute, the whole, comes to know itself through the unfolding of history and consciousness. Every effort to know, every resolved contradiction contributes.
So after all that, what does this mean for us as we navigate our own lives trying to understand ourselves and the world?
Well, here's a thought to leave you with. If the entirety of history, with all its wars, revolutions, creations, and destructions, is the Golgotha of absolute spirit, this place of necessary suffering, death, and transformation, then what exactly is the throne that spirit wins through this process? What does that ultimate self-knowing reality look like? And perhaps more personally, how might our own individual acts of knowing, our own moments of confronting the negative and striving for understanding, actually contribute to building and sustaining that throne, keeping spirit from being lifeless and alone?